There are currently no indications of Russia's concrete intentions for war against NATO. That's what Bruno Karl, the president of Germany's Federal Intelligence Service, said just a few months ago in November 2024. But even then, he also warned that Russia was likely to be in a position to attack the West by the end of the decade. Fast forward to March 2025, and that statement hasn't aged well. Because now German intelligence isn't just warning about the possibility of war, it's got a date, a time frame, a ticking clock. And spoiler alert, it's too close for comfort. Here's everything you need to know. The European intelligence agencies have kept a close eye on Russia and its President Vladimir Putin for a while now. It's long been feared that Ukraine wasn't the end goal, it was just the beginning. And now these fears are coming true, and they've got evidence to back it up. The evidence in question? A full-blown assessment jointly produced by Germany's Federal Intelligence Service, the BND, and the Bundeswehr, Germany's armed forces. And their conclusion is chilling. Russia sees the West as a systemic enemy and plans to do something about it. According to the documents, Putin's regime isn't just thinking in terms of Ukraine. It's preparing for a long-term confrontation with NATO. The country is willing and getting ready to use military force to push its imperialist goals forward. So it's not surprising that major German outlets are ringing the alarm about this assessment. Süddeutsche Zeitung, one of the country's most respected newspapers, WDR and NDR, two leading public broadcasters, all of them have reported on this worrying assessment in late March. And they're not solely quoting the assessment, they've analyzed the intelligence themselves. Jörg Schmidt, the deputy head of Süddeutsche Zeitung's investigative department, has been digging into this. Alongside his colleagues at WDR and NDR, he's pored over internal reports from the BND and the Bundeswehr. Their verdict? Putin isn't stopping at Ukraine. But also he's watching NATO. He's thinking about Article 5, the backbone of the alliance. If one member is attacked, all are supposed to respond. The real question is, will they? And more importantly, does Putin believe they will? That might be the bet he's about to make. Now, this Article 5 gamble was also discussed earlier in March by none other than Karl. At the time, Karl made it clear that Russia wants to test NATO's resolve. Specifically, Putin was aiming to gauge the US reaction to see how far the US would go in supporting its allies. If Russia triggered Article 5, would NATO really stand behind it? As Karl said, we have to assume that Russia wants to put the unity of the West to the test. And with the US practically out of the picture, this is no longer just a theory. Karl revealed that these discussions are spilling out of the intelligence agencies and into the wider media, even in Russia itself. The Kremlin is openly debating how much trust the West places in its own defense commitments. Now, having these kinds of warnings from one of the most respected and effective intelligence agencies in the world, one with over 300 locations in Germany and other countries, is not something to take lightly. The agency's top spy, Bruno Karl, coming out to publicly speak on them only adds to the gravity of the situation. But then you also have the Inspector General of the Bundeswehr, General Carsten Breuer, weighing in with an equally chilling warning. When both Germany's intelligence and military chiefs say the threat is real and imminent, it becomes clear that Europe is truly staring down the barrel, and time is running out. You see, Breuer isn't a man known for dramatic flair, so when he's visibly uncomfortable when asked about the future of Europe, you know it's serious, and his answer to the question does nothing to dispel the gravity of the situation. The general was flat out asked if the West could breathe easy after a potential ceasefire in Ukraine. At first he paused, but then he delivered the unsettling answer: no, we cannot breathe easy. It was clear that this wasn't some gut feeling, it's a cold, calculated assessment of the future. Breuer knows that Russia is preparing for a large-scale war with NATO. With this in mind, let's just rip the band-aid off. When will this Russian threat materialize? Well, there are a few options, and none of them offer any comfort. Now, the exact timing depends largely on how the war in Ukraine plays out, which means predicting the future is tricky. As we've seen in Ukraine, things can change rapidly, so no one can say for sure exactly when the threat will actually unfold. However, the German intelligence assessment predicts that Russia might create the conditions for a large-scale conventional war against NATO by the end of the decade. That's 2029 or 2030 at the latest, just a few years down the road. But this isn't even the worst-case scenario. If the war in Ukraine ends sooner than expected, Russia could redirect its focus to NATO much quicker. According to Karl, an early end to the conflict would allow Russia to redeploy its military forces and target Europe sooner than previously anticipated. This means we could see a threat or blackmail attempt from Russia against Europe in the near future, much earlier than the predicted 2029 to 2030 window. On the other hand, if the war in Ukraine drags on, Russia would still be ready for a large-scale confrontation by 2029, the end of the decade. By then, Russia will have likely built up all military capacity needed to challenge NATO, regardless of what happens in Ukraine. Now, this prediction might scare you at first. However, it should also raise an important question. How could Russia possibly pull this off militarily? After all, the country's military capabilities have been decimated in Ukraine, suffering record losses. Just take the April 4th report by the General Staff of Ukraine's Armed Forces as an example. According to the report, in a little over 3 years, Russia has lost a jaw-dropping 920,950 troops. Now, this figure includes killed, wounded, and captured soldiers. It's not all fatalities, but it's still an unfathomably high number. Nearly 1 million soldiers lost in just over 3 years is a devastating blow to any military. And this isn't the only blow to the Russian military. Its equipment has taken just as heavy a toll. According to the same report by Ukraine's General Staff, Russia has lost 10,528 tanks, 21,932 armored fighting vehicles, and 42,841 vehicles and fuel tanks over the course of the conflict. That's significantly more than most countries in the world would even have. And the damage doesn't stop there. 25,663 artillery systems, 1,349 multiple launch rocket systems, and 1,123 air defense systems have been wiped out. In the skies, Russia has lost 370 airplanes, 355 helicopters, while on the ground, 31,669 drones have been destroyed. Even at sea, Russia hasn't been spared, with 28 ships and boats and 1 submarine sunk. Calling this a devastating loss doesn't even begin to capture the scale of the damage, and yet all we see from Russia is building, building, building. New equipment, new infrastructure, a new army. In fact, this relentless military buildup was one of the first things that alerted intelligence services, Germany's BND included, that Russia's ambitions extend far beyond its current objectives. It's a clear signal that the country's eyes are set on Europe, and NATO is in Russia's crosshairs. So how exactly is Russia preparing for this large-scale war? Well, the answer is, with everything it has, and it's happening at a scale we can't afford to ignore. First off, Russia's military spending is surging. In 2025, the country is expected to allocate a staggering 13.5 trillion rubles to its defense budget, more than 6% of its GDP. That's almost $160 billion by current exchange rates, and a nearly 4-fold increase compared to just a few years ago. But this isn't even the worst part. What's truly alarming is that Russia's military spending has overtaken Europe's. Now, if you keep up with defense budgets, you might wonder how this is possible. After all, Europe's combined defense budget in 2024 was $457 billion. Meanwhile, Russia's military expenditure for the same year was roughly $145.9 billion, less than half of Europe's total. But here's the thing, when you adjust Russia's defense spending for purchasing power parity, which accounts for lower costs in Russia due to cheaper domestic production, the picture changes significantly. In PPP terms, Russia's military spending is estimated at around $461.6 billion. While Europe's spending remains higher in nominal terms, the PPP-adjusted figure helps explain how Russia can afford a larger military apparatus than market exchange rates alone would suggest. It's a stark reminder that dollars don't always buy the same firepower everywhere. Another terrifying possibility? 1.5 million Russian soldiers ready to strike whenever, wherever. Unfortunately, this isn't just Putin's wishful thinking. It's a massive expansion of personnel already underway. You see, by 2026, the Russian military plans to boost its ranks to 2.39 million soldiers, with 1.5 million of them being active servicemen. To this end, the Russian government sent out a military call-up to 160,000 men aged 18 to 30 on April 1st. This is the single largest number of conscripts since 2011. And here's the kicker. Vice Admiral Vladimir Tsimlyansky, deputy chief of the Russian General Staff's main organizational and mobilization department, said that these conscripts wouldn't be sent to fight in Ukraine. While no specifics were given, this kind of statement has become very routine every time Russia launches a draft, likely meant to reassure the public that the military is following laws prohibiting deployment of conscripts to combat zones without sufficient training. But reading between the lines, the timing and scale of this mobilization still suggests that Russia may be preparing for something far bigger. But Russia's army isn't just getting bigger, it's getting stronger too. According to assessments, Russian force levels and equipment near NATO borders are expected to rise by 30 to 50% by 2026. This means more troops and more advanced weaponry, and a significant increase in firepower aimed directly at NATO's eastern flank. The German intelligence also touched on this in its assessment. According to officials, Russia's land forces near the Baltic have been committed to Ukraine for the time being, but 3/4 of them are still there, holding ground. So what happens when they return home? It's easy to see where this is headed. The Russian Navy and Air Force, which remains at high readiness, will be likely redeployed quickly, possibly even swarming NATO's eastern flank. With these forces already primed, Russia can switch from fighting to Ukraine to confronting NATO at a moment's notice. Russia's military restructuring is also clear. The creation of new military districts, such as the one in St. Petersburg, is a sign that Russia's forces are now oriented toward the West. These changes represent a realignment of resources geared up for a possible NATO confrontation. Breuer mentioned these in his appearance on the Maischberger talk show. We see military structures that are clearly oriented towards the West. We see armaments going into depots. We see personnel buildup. This is a man whose job it is to read the tea leaves of military threats, and right now, he's seeing something ominous on the horizon. Put it all together, and what do we get? A terrifyingly well-prepared Russia, building its forces, rearming at breakneck pace, and positioning for a future where the next target is not Ukraine, it's NATO. So what is NATO doing about it? NATO is making its position very clear. Any attack on a NATO member will trigger a devastating response from the alliance. Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary-General, left no room for ambiguity in his recent statement. He stressed that if Russia, or any other aggressor, miscalculates and thinks they can take on a NATO member, they will face the full might of the alliance. And it's not just talk. NATO is backing up these bold statements with action. All members are striving to raise their defense budgets, with Poland leading the charge. This critical player in NATO's eastern defense, and a potential target of Russia, as you'll hear later, has been investing heavily in its defenses. So heavily that the country is ranked the #1 NATO spender by GDP share, and yes, that includes the US. That's what spending a staggering 4.1% of your GDP on defense gets you. Following Poland's shining example, the entirety of Europe seems to be waking up. In March 2025, the European Commission unveiled a sweeping white paper on European defense, setting a clear strategy to enhance the European Union's defense posture over the next 5 years. Coincidentally, or absolutely not, 5 years is roughly the same time frame attached to a Russian attack by the German intelligence. The plan, known as the Rearm Europe Readiness 2030 initiative, is designed to increase military investment across the continent, with an eye toward increasing Europe's overall defense capacity. So how much money are we talking about here? Is it another Russia spends more situation? Absolutely not. A staggering $880 billion will be allocated to bolster European defense capabilities, with the EU raising up to $165 billion through capital markets to fuel its effort. These funds will be used for joint procurement, military infrastructure, and enhancing the defense industries of the EU member states. The focus is on closing key capability gaps, and the white paper identifies several critical areas that need to be addressed. Number 1. Air and missile defense. Europe will invest in a unified, multi-layered air and missile defense system to protect against a range of airborne threats, from ballistic and hypersonic missiles to drones. This will provide a robust shield against Russia's growing aerial capabilities. Number 2. Artillery and ammunition. The EU plans to ramp up production of advanced artillery systems and long-range missiles, making sure that Europe is equipped to deliver precise strikes against land targets. Additionally, a strategic reserve of ammunition will be developed, while production ramps up to at least 2 million rounds of artillery ammunition per year, specifically to sustain support for Ukraine. Number 3. Drones and counter-drone systems. The EU is keen on enhancing its unmanned systems capabilities, including drones that can operate on land, air, and water. Drones have proven to be a force multiplier in the Ukraine conflict, so the EU plans to boost its own capabilities. Number 4. Military mobility. A pan-European network of land corridors, airports, and seaports will be developed to allow for rapid movement of troops and equipment. This will ensure that NATO can quickly reinforce its eastern flank, particularly in countries like Poland and the Baltics. And number 5. Cybersecurity and electronic warfare. With increasing cyber threats, the EU is committed to enhancing its cybersecurity capabilities, focusing on artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and electronic warfare systems to protect critical infrastructure and military assets. Now let's state the obvious. This plan is almost tailor-made to face the exact threats posed by Russia. It might as well be called the Rearm Europe Counter-Russia 2030 initiative. However, the only silver lining in all of this, if you can even call it that, is that Russia won't be ready for an all-out war in the immediate future. Plus, even when that time comes, Russia will likely not seek a large-scale land grab, as Karl describes it, but to create a split inside NATO. But until this happens, Russia might try to target one or more NATO countries individually. This assessment doesn't come from the German intelligence officers but from their friends at Lithuania's State Security Department, or VSD for short. According to the VSD, while Russia isn't yet capable of a full-scale assault on NATO, the possibility of a more limited military action against one or several NATO states remains very much on the table. In fact, the agency suggests that Russia could perceive such an attack as a way to provoke a swift and localized conflict, believing NATO might not react in time or at all. This risky gamble raises an important question. Which NATO countries could end up being the target of this dangerous experiment? Well, what if we told you that several NATO countries are already being targeted by Russia, just not in the conventional way? According to German intelligence, Russia is already waging an escalating campaign of subversion and sabotage against European targets. And this isn't just your average espionage, it's a brazen, violent attack on everything a country holds vital. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, this includes transportation targets like trains, vehicles, and planes, which were struck in 27% of all incidents. Government targets like military bases and officials, which accounted for another 27%, critical infrastructure targets like pipelines, undersea fiber optic cables, and the electric grid, which took up 21% of the attacks, and the defense industry companies like BAE Systems, Rheinmetall, Diehl, and EMCO with 21% of attacks. Russia's main intelligence directorate, or GRU for short, has been behind an alarming uptick in these attacks, nearly tripling in number between 2023 and 2024, after already quadrupling between 2022 and 23. The most common tactics: explosives and incendiaries with 35%, blunt or edged instruments like anchors with 27%, and electronic attacks with 15%. And these attacks aren't confined to one country either. Russia has cast a wide net across Europe, deliberately targeting nations that are key players in the Western alliance and those that have supported Ukraine. In the United Kingdom, for example, Russian intelligence has been busy orchestrating a campaign of chaos. Richard Moore, the chief of the Secret Intelligence Service, better known as MI6, revealed that they've uncovered a staggeringly reckless campaign of Russian sabotage in Europe, one that not only threatens British shores, but the entire continent. Germany, too, has become a primary target of this shadow war. Thomas Haldenwang, former president of the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution of Germany, reported that Russia is using everything in its arsenal, from cyber attacks on infrastructure to brutal sabotage missions designed to shake the foundations of the state. Karl echoed this sentiment and put it even more bluntly. According to him, Germany is in direct confrontation with Russia. The country, along with its Western allies, is under siege from all directions: cyber, physical, and psychological. And then there's Poland, which finds itself in the firing line on NATO's eastern edge. Polish officials have been sounding the alarm for months, with Prime Minister Donald Tusk warning that Russia's ambitions go beyond its borders, planning acts of air terror against Poland and other NATO countries. Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs confirmed that Russia is waging a hybrid war against Poland, one that includes cyber attacks and direct military provocations at its eastern frontier. The Baltic states, particularly Estonia, have also felt the sting of Russia's hybrid warfare. Estonia's Prime Minister, Kaja Kallas, has repeatedly warned of a shadow war waged against the country, designed to disrupt democratic decision-making and weaken social cohesion. With its location on the front lines of NATO's eastern defense, Estonia is a critical target for Russia's broader campaign to undermine Western unity. Finally, NATO as a whole has recognized that Russia's hybrid warfare is no longer confined to the periphery of Europe. It's now an all-out assault on the very core of the alliance's security. Now, the only thing left is to wonder which of these countries could go from being a target of unconventional warfare to facing a full-scale military conflict. Could it be Poland? The country sits at the heart of Eastern Europe, both geographically and militarily, and an attack here would send shockwaves through NATO. As a key member of the alliance, Poland's strategic location makes it a prime candidate for Russia to test NATO's commitment to collective defense. And let's be honest, it certainly doesn't help that Poland and Russia hate each other. Or could Russia go after the Baltics, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania? These NATO members are small, vulnerable, and right on Russia's doorstep. Their limited military capabilities makes them easy targets for small-scale incursions. Plus, there's the fact that all of these countries are former Soviet states, and we know how Putin feels about reclaiming what he sees as historically part of Russia. Alternatively, Russia could decide to punish some European countries for supporting Ukraine. In this case, Germany might be first on the list, with $13.84 billion in donated military aid, according to the Kiel Institute. However, German government figures suggest even higher totals when factoring in future commitments and replacement costs. Then there are the Nordic countries, with Putin's frustration at Sweden and Finland being particularly palpable after their NATO accession. And hey, Putin doesn't even have to follow the list of Ukraine's largest donors. He could just go for any country that has supplied weapons to Ukraine or sheltered Russian defectors, such as Bulgaria, France, and Spain. In other words, the imminent attack against NATO could take place virtually anywhere, depending on how Russia calculates the vulnerability and value of each target. So let us ask you, which of the NATO countries do you see as the likeliest target? And what about the findings of German intelligence? Do you think Russia will wait for the end of the decade, or will it try to test NATO's resolve sooner? Let us know what you think in the comments.